StarWars.com would often release a book's cover months in advance to offer fans a first look at upcoming titles. But Inferno by Troy Denning, the 6th book in the Legacy of the Force series, was a little different. The solicitation cover just contained the title, the author's name, and flames. After all, in March of 2007, the identity and outcome of Jacen's titular sacrifice in book number 5 was still unknown. The final cover art was not revealed until a few days after Sacrifice's release, and the back cover description wasn't made public until a month afterwards. So with book 6 onwards, this is where I start to venture into the unknown, because in 2007, I didn't read past Legacy of the Force Sacrifice. So a brief summary. As the galaxy explodes into all-out civil war, Jacen Solo has seized control of the Galactic Alliance, and in murdering his aunt, has become a secret yet fully fledged Sith Lord. With Luke consumed by his grief, Jacen works quickly to consolidate his power and jumpstart his plans to take over both the Jedi and the galaxy as a whole. So Luke has a choice. Does he join forces with his nephew to save the Galactic Alliance, even though Jacen has become a tyrant? Or does he join the Confederation to smash a Galactic Alliance that he ultimately helped create? Inferno is a bit shorter than the books that preceded it. The paperback clocks in at just under 300 pages. But there's a number of plot threads running through this novel. One of the biggest ones is Luke Skywalker and Ben Skywalker separately dealing with their grief around Mara's death, as Ben decides that he's going to confirm whether Jacen killed her or not, and ends up on a rather chaotic revenge path. Meanwhile, Luke goes from complete inaction, which makes sense for his grief, but also is not that surprising when Luke and the Jedi Order have been hesitant to take action, to siding with the Galactic Alliance, to cutting ties with the Galactic Alliance, and heading off to Kashyyyk. Han and Leia narrowly escape an ambush planned by Jacen with Galactic Alliance guard troops, and head off to first Kashyyyk to talk with the Wookiees, and then later Hapes to talk to Tenel Ka, the Queen Mother herself. Jaina and Jag and Zek continue to try to track down Alema Rar, and end up getting drawn into part of Jacen's terrible, horrible plans for the Jedi on the Academy on Ossus. Alema herself, meanwhile, goes to Lumaya's asteroid base, digs through the stuff she can find there, and then heads off in search of what seems to be more Sith. And finally, Jacen, continuing his self-denial, self-justification, bonkers track, starts using battle meditation to manipulate this conflict between the Galactic Alliance and the Confederation, and all the time he's doing it for the good of the Galactic Alliance, and takes some very aggressive actions in attacking the Jedi and then firebombing Kashyyyk. So first, let's talk about Luke and Ben. I think I expected that in Inferno that Luke and Ben would finally have like a heart-to-heart, would sit down and talk with each other, but maybe I should have expected differently, because after all, we do still have 3 more books to go after this, so father and son's inability to communicate with each other continues here. Ben knows that he told his mother that Jacen was conspiring with Lumaya, and then his mother died. So Ben strongly suspects Jacen of causing her death. But he doesn't tell his father any of this. So instead, Luke ends up believing that possibly Alema Rar caused Mara's death because Jaina and Jag and Zek have intelligence that places Alema in the Hapan cluster right after Mara's murder. So Ben confronts Jacen. Jacen denies and redirects him towards Cal Omos, who he suggests conspired to kill Mara. Ben confronts Cal Omos. Cal Omos basically confirms what Ben originally thought, which is that, no, I didn't order her death at all. You should maybe look at your cousin here. But things don't turn out well for Cal Omos because he dies in the end. Ben doesn't assassinate him, but that's what it looks like. Cal Omos basically threw himself on Ben's lightsaber blade. And that event, in turn, is what snaps Luke out of his dithering / grieving / still trying to work with the Galactic Alliance. He had thought, well, Jacen's not doing good things, but we're the Jedi, we need to support the Alliance in the end, even though it seems like none of the other masters think that's a good idea. They're just agreeing with Luke because he's the Grand Master of the Jedi Order. And when they hear that, apparently Ben has assassinated the former chief of state of the Galactic Alliance, and it seems pretty clear that Jacen is behind that. While the Jedi help the Galactic Alliance win the Battle of Balmorra, they abandoned them during the Battle of Kuat and essentially defect to the Confederate side. Ben comes back to Jacen, realizing he needs more information and pretending to side with him. And in a way, it's Ben going undercover that causes the events at Kashyyyk. He tells Jacen that his father told him to meet the rest of the Jedi on Kashyyyk. Jacen's the one that starts shooting at the Wookiees, but it's Ben's idea to bomb the cities itself. And Ben attacks Jacen, only for Jacen to overpower him and to put him in an embrace of pain. More about that later. I'll save that for the issues bit. But it all culminates in Luke faking his death, Luke's family upset about Luke's loss, only for Luke to sneak onto Jacen's flagship, the Anakin Solo, take out like all the turbo laser things, and then to confront Jacen in a battle. And for a lot of this, Luke has the upper hand over Jacen. I think that Jacen isn't prepared for Luke's sheer power. And it's something that we see Luke use sparingly because it can make him seem just way too overpowered at times. But there are 3 more books to go, so Luke doesn't defeat Jacen. Luke doesn't kill him. In fact, he stops Ben from trying to kill Jacen because he says, no, you'll turn to the dark side. And Ben's like, but he killed my mother. And Luke's like, no, we think Alema did it. And then Ben's like, what? Alema? So the book ends with Ben still not having shared with his father any of the stuff he overheard in book 5 that led to his mother's death. And in fact, no one realizing that Jacen killed Mara, but it seems that for the next book, they will all be off on a wild goose chase again, chasing Alema. Leia and Han, meanwhile, are still fugitives from Galactic Alliance justice. And in fact, they don't get to see Mara's memorial service because Jacen sends troops to arrest them, and they basically have to leave the Jedi Temple. This was a little frustrating to me because on the one hand, I can understand if you're fugitives and you show up at the government's capital, like maybe, you know, this isn't gonna work out. But at the same time, Mara was their sister-in-law. Leia was meant to give the eulogy. And it just gives me a bad feeling having Leia and Han completely miss out on this celebration of her life. They learn that The Wookiees aren't sure if they want to side with the Galactic Alliance or not, so they go to Kashyyyk to talk the Wookiees into stay neutral. Like, they don't have to outright side with the Confederation, just don't help the Galactic Alliance. But a Denning character reappears, actually two of them, Jude, the Celestian agent for the Galactic Alliance, and Tarfang, the nasty little Ewok. But you know what? It could be worse. It could be the Squibs. No Squibs. Hurrah. June talks the Wookiees into holding Han and Leia in jail because they are fugitives from justice. But the Wookiees are willing to listen to them, and Leia's pushing them to be neutral. And Luke shows up with the rest of the Jedi, having fled the Battle of Kuat. Luke reveals that the Jedi Council have decided they can't support the Galactic Alliance anymore, and they want the Wookiees to help them. Which unfortunately does not turn out very well for the Wookiees in the end. With Jacen hammering Kashyyyk, Leia and Han come up with a plan that could end that battle, and so they jet off for Hapes to let Tenel Ka know what Jacen's really using her last remaining fleet for. They smuggle her back to Kashyyyk, and Jacen's forces are routed and they have to retreat. And as the book ends, Leia and Han seem to have made peace with the fact that Jacen as he was is dead, and that the horrible tyrant he has become now needs to be stopped. Jaina and Jag and Zek are still on their mission to track down Alema Rar. Apparently, in between the books, they have uncovered evidence that Alema was on Ruku Depot right after Mara's death, which makes them suspect Alema as her killer, and they follow her to the Jedi Academy on Ossus, which puts them in the right place at the very wrong time. At the same time that Jacen tried to arrest his parents, he seemed to have troops in place to take over the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, but decided against it. What he did decide to do was to send troops to take the Jedi Academy. And he put a completely deranged individual in charge of that mission. So Zek stays in hiding as like a hidden weapon if they need to use him, while Jaina and Jag surrender their weapons and try to keep tensions calm at the Academy. But unfortunately, the situation gets much worse, with the wackadoo that Jacen put in charge pulling all the Jedi younglings out of the temple and attempting to incapacitate all the adult Jedi. And while Jaina and Jag and Zek are ultimately successful in retaking the Jedi Academy and disposing of Serpa, I think his name was, it has dire consequences for other people. Cam Solusar seems to be badly wounded, young Jedi Knights are killed, younglings are killed, and most upsetting, Tionne Solusar, the wife of Cam, one of the two biggest teachers at the Academy, is mutilated and tortured before our eyes. Jag and Zek stay behind on Ossus while Jaina heads off to Kashyyyk, and she's there to witness Luke's supposed death. I always appreciate when Jaina is given a little bit more to do in these books because she is definitely not as major a character as her brother Jacen. But at the same time, she seems to have given up on Jacen much sooner than Leia and Han did. Perhaps because he betrayed her and the other young Jedi in the Killik conflict all the way back in the Dark Nest trilogy, and she's been suspicious of his motives ever since. But I don't know. One of the things I always found interesting about Jaina and Jacen was that connection they had as twins. And that's been completely bulldozed over and apparently dead for books on books on books now. Speaking of Alema, she has the Sith meditation sphere that Ben found and then Lumaya took, and she heads off to Lumaya's asteroid and uncovers stuff that suggests that there's like a bunch more Sith around. So she heads to Korriban, one of the major Sith worlds, and encounters a group of Sith It seems like she's now decided that the best thing for balance is to help Jacen achieve his ends. So she's still focused on killing Leia, or at least making Leia suffer, but also trying to fulfill what Lumaya started. Anyway, she encounters these Sith who call themselves the One Sith, which I believe is a reference to the Legacy comic, which is set considerably later than this book, and then ends up saves Jacen from his own problems at the end of Inferno. That using the Sith meditation sphere, she's able to manipulate the Bothan fleet to allow Jacen and the rest of the Fifth Fleet to escape. I feel like in every book up to this point, I've said, like, I don't think Alema has much longer to live. And this book, surprisingly, she did not fight against anyone. She was not confronted by anyone. So yeah, she'll definitely be in book 7, which honestly surprised me when she first showed up in book number 3. And finally, Jacen. The more terrible things he does, the more that he justifies it to himself. And I keep thinking, what more terrible thing can he do in this book? And I do think that firebombing the Wookiees has been one of the worst things he's done thus far. He's become so self-deluded that he's like, yes, I love Chewbacca, but they've betrayed me and their world needs to burn. Like, he doesn't target their ships. He targets Kashyyyk itself, the villages, and I think he probably would have started to do that, but Ben definitely messed up there by raising the possibility of that as an action at all. His sense of his own fallibility is getting increasingly twisted too, that it's almost as though in his head he can do no wrong, that everything he does is justified, and that he's better than everyone else around him. He initially had this very strong resentment towards Luke, because Luke is his uncle, because Luke is the leader of the Jedi Order, because Luke has this legacy that maybe he felt he had to live up to. And I feel like that resentment is, if not completely gone, sort of subsumed by his feeling that he's better than everyone else around him now. Like, he's such a pompous, disgusting creep at this point. And Tenel Ka's betrayal, I think, comes as a surprise to him, because I think so much of what he did, he justified as being for Alana, and that Tenel Ka would never let him down, that Tenel Ka would always support him. But in the end, his actions were just so extreme that she withdraws her support too, and he's mad about it. And with the death of Lumaya, he needs a new minion. So he starts to manipulate Tahiri Vela. He offers her the ability to force walk back to pivotal points before Anakin died in the New Jedi Order series. And I also want to touch on that in the issues bit, but I'll just say that she is very receptive to what he says, and is not his apprentice in any way. I think he still hopes that Ben could become his Sith apprentice, but she's definitely a tool that he is willing to use. I think for someone whose dark side journey was a tiny bit logical, Jacen at this point, like, there is no logic to what he does. He thinks everything he does makes sense. But I find it very telling that he sends this completely crazy individual to deal with the Jedi Academy on Ossus, because Jacen's own reasoning seems to be becoming increasingly skewed as he progresses further and further down this dark slope. And I'm wondering too if the subsequent 3 books will have Jacen's physical health degrading further and further, because that seems to be an element of the dark side, at least from the movies and from previous books, that the dark side corrupts, the dark side degrades, the dark side tears you apart. And here he has physical injuries from his showdown with Luke, so I'm interested to see if his physical state declines as well. So my first issue with Inferno was related to pace. I found the first half of the book really slow going, and it was a bit of a drag. Fortunately, the second half of the book was much faster paced, but at times I felt like it was almost too frenetic and too chaotic. We have the Jedi leaving the Battle of Kuwat. We have Luke suddenly appearing on Kashyyyk. We have Jacen rushing over to Kashyyyk, firebombing Kashyyyk. We have Han and Leia dashing off to Hapes. We have the Jedi taking off in their stealth X-Wings, Jaina following Luke and seemingly witnessing Luke's death. And here's one thing. Obviously, Luke did not die. Luke faked his death somehow and landed on the Anakin Solo. But, like, what happened to R2? R2 was in the X-Wing, and then we never see R2 at any point after that. Obviously, Luke was able to successfully land, but, like, where's R2? I need to know that that little trash bucket's okay. And then Luke's fight with Jacen at times I found disorienting. And then too, the way that Jacen escapes, it's just all very fast-paced and maybe too fast-paced in the end. I did really take issue with Denning's treatment of various characters here. With Tionne is tortured before our very eyes. Her limbs are blown off. And this is so upsetting to me. I think because Tionne is not a warrior. I don't know if I've ever seen Tionne with a lightsaber in her hand. Tionne is a historian, she's a teacher, she's a musician, she's the closest thing that the Star Wars universe has to a bard. And of course, she would want to protect the children under her care. But what happened to her just felt excessive. Kathy Tyers, who wrote The True Sepulchre and Balance Point, has a novel from the late 80s called Crystal Witness. And this is like a really deep cut reference, okay? I know most of you won't get this. But in the climactic end of that novel, the main character, Ming, who is a calligrapher, who literally uses her hands to create art, has her hands broken by the villain. I felt the same way about Tionne, I guess, that to mutilate Tionne in that way, knowing that this is a woman who uses her hands to create music, it just, the more I thought about it, the more it upset me and the more it really made me feel sick to my stomach. And I'm sure she'll be okay, but the fact that when Jaina comes to Kashyyyk and meets with Luke and we don't get any word about Tionne's condition, I know that Tionne is not a major character in any way, but I'm sure there are dozens of people out there like me who love Tionne and are really concerned about her well-being, and I don't know, her treatment here upset me. Likewise, the treatment of Tahiri really upset me, and I think it comes down to whether you think that Tahiri has healed from the events of the Yuuzhan invasion or not. And clearly in the book, we're meant to believe that she still has this wound connected to the loss of Anakin Solo, that she is receptive to Jacen's manipulations, and that he is able to twist her and use her in that way. It seems to me to be saying that some events are too traumatic and that people are just irreparably broken afterwards. And I thought some of the power of Tahiri's plotline in The New Jedi Order was that Tahiri went through terrible events. Tahiri lost the person she loved most in the world. Tahiri's mind essentially shattered into two, but she was strong enough to be able to unite those two parts of herself and to live on, to recognize that she loved Anakin, but that she could live past that, that she could build a new life for herself. And it felt like Inferno was saying, no, she's still weak. Almost that she's like an addict and Jacen can just so easily suck her back in. And I don't like that because I thought that her character was stronger than that, and it just seems to be setting up a precedent that I don't really like. And my final issue is a weird one, but as soon as we saw that Jacen had a hidden embrace of pain stowed away on, his Star Destroyer, and he's using it to torture his cousin, put him through the same thing that Vergere put him through, and it will make him stronger. All I could think is, like, where did he get this from? And how did he sneak it on the Anakin Solo? I would have thought that, as we saw at the end of Return of the Jedi, the special editions, where, we see all these different worlds across the galaxy and they're throwing over statues of the Emperor and things like that, that if there had been embraces of pain left behind on worlds that the Yuuzhan had taken over, that the occupants of those worlds would have just, like, straight up burned them to a crisp. And, like, unless Jacen for some reason is going to Zonama Seacoast and gets one from there, but then again, the whole point of the Yuuzhan going to Zonama Seacoast was to figure their stuff out, to be like, hey, your weird pain stuff, that's not what you're meant to be doing. You're gonna work through your issues and come out better. It's obviously very evocative of Traitor, but, like, I really want to know where this thing came from and where he got it and how he's able to sneak it on board, because it's just so bizarre to me in the end. So, in short, Inferno is all about the aftermath of the events of Sacrifice. Luke Skywalker goes from consumed by his grief to taking action and standing against Jacen and the Galactic Alliance. Ben Skywalker tries to get revenge on his own, only for that to fail. And Jacen has lost one of his longest-standing allies, and Tenel Ka has removed her support from him. A lot happens here, but I did find the pace in the first half very, very slow, and the pace in the second half almost too fast. And in the end, I had some issues with the treatment of several characters here, to the point of just, like, closing the book up, putting it down, and then sitting there like, was this personally created to hurt me? I know not, but it felt that way at times. So next time, I'm going to be reading book number 7 in the Legacy of the Force series, Fury by Aaron Alston.